All right, everyone, welcome to the Friday Tech Talk. Today we have a great guest. His name is Chris Carter. He's a Tech Academy graduate, and he is a full stack .NET developer. He's currently working for Concora Credit, and he's a certified Microsoft professional. And Chris is going to discuss what hiring managers prioritize when evaluating candidates, what are the common pitfalls that candidates often encounter, and he will provide strategies to avoid mistakes. So without further ado, Chris, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yep, my name is Chris Carter. I have to say that there's been a little bit of a difference in the title of the talk. I am not a hiring manager. I am just a colleague. So I will tell you primarily what your colleagues are looking for when they interview you, because that's actually one of the really fun things I've been able to do as a senior developer is participate in the interviews. But I also got some feedback from my actual hiring manager on the talk. And the first feedback they gave me was that my slides were boring. But they also helped me to tweak that part of the talk too. So let me go ahead and share my window. All right, good. Is it coming through?
Yep, we can see it.
All right. So yeah, I started at the Tech Academy, graduated in 2016. And let's see if I can get my cursor here. There we go. And did an internship with Prosper IT Consulting, which helped tremendously. It was a tremendous experience. And I got a contract position at Intel right out of Tech Academy. That was really a great experience as well. Had a 5-month dry spell before my next contract at US Bank, and was converted to a senior software engineer there at US Bank, and moved on to being a senior software engineer at Concora Credit in 2021, where I've been ever since. So today what I primarily want to focus on is what are your colleagues looking for when they interview you for a junior developer position? Because I think that's probably most appropriate to the audience today. But I'll also comment a little bit on what I look for differently if I'm hiring or I'm interviewing a senior developer. We'll take a little detour if what I'm saying doesn't sound like it's you. And then I can actually give a little bit of perspective about what the hiring manager is looking for and how that differs from what I am looking for. So for the junior developer, obviously, I'm looking for technical ability. Can you write code? Can you also craft a solution with code? And do you have software engineering knowledge? I'm also looking for non-technical things, and these actually are just about as important as the technical aspects. I would say, can you write code is the most important. But after that, I'm looking for, can you communicate, and are you personable? And then, can you craft a solution and software engineering knowledge? Well, if you're a junior developer, you may not have a lot of experience doing that, but that's something that you'll learn as long as you can write some basic code and as long as you can communicate with the rest of the team. There are also some sort of integrative things that I look for. If you've got experience in a corporate workplace or at least in a production environment, even if it's your own production environment, that has some implications. So we'll talk about that too. But first of all, can you write code? And there's nothing real fancy about this. I just want to know if you can code your way out of a box. So I'll provide you with a basic task and just see how you approach it. Do you have an organized thought process? So it's really helpful to talk your way through as you do these code challenges, so people can see what you're thinking. So I have some examples. So the first one is write a function which traverses a string. So it's not rocket science. This should be reasonably comfortable for a junior developer. So I'll give you a string 4 score and 7. What I have on this slide is the naive solution. So you basically create an empty reversed string, and then you step through the given string backwards, right? And then you just take that character of this given string and you add it to the reversed string. So you basically construct the reverse string character by character backwards from the given string. If you gave me this, I would say, yep, that works. That will definitely reverse a string. And I've actually checked this code. It does. However, it's not the best code. Can you tell me why? And you might say, well, it's not very efficient because when you add this substring, which is going to be a single character, to the string that you are creating, you can't actually add strings together. What happens is that C# will create a whole new string. So in this case, you would make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 22 separate strings. You'd create a new string every time you added a character. So it's not very efficient from a time or a memory standpoint. And so adding strings together is not recommended. This is a solution that would be more interesting. It's obviously longer, but it shows that you understand data structures in a way that's going to be really useful. So here you've got the given string, and you're going to create a stack. And you are going to just iterate through each character in the given string and put it onto the stack, right? So the first character, the capital F, is this orange, and it goes on the stack. And then you keep adding stuff. And so the last character ends up on the top of the stack. Then go ahead and create a character array that's the same length as the original one and pull stuff off the stack. And so what went on last gets pulled off first. And you do that by popping stuff off, popping stuff off the stack. And then you increment your I, so you move on to the next spot in your reversed array. And then the last thing is you turn this array back into a string. So this is lower. This shows that you understand data structures and algorithms at a low level. And you know more than just the usual, well, I just make everything a list, right? Stack shows a little bit of knowledge of the language. Here's a third way you might answer this question, which to me is just as interesting. You're basically using the built-in functions of C# and saying, look, there's already a string.reverse. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Microsoft has already invented this wheel for me. So I find it interesting that you know the language well enough to know that you don't have to spend a whole lot of time reinventing this wheel. You can use what's already in the language. So basically take the given string, you reverse it, you turn that into a character array, and you make the new string. So it's a one-liner. So it doesn't indicate that you understand the low-level workings of computer science, but it demonstrates that you understand the high-level workings of the language. And in the real-world environment, this would be a lot faster to write than this, right? So I would be impressed by either this or this. Doesn't really matter. Here's another question I might ask, and have asked, as a matter of fact. So given this table of employees with an employee ID, department name, the employee name and the salary, write a query to return all the department names that have more than 100 employees in them. And so this is kind of an example of how you might talk through the solution. So say, okay, well, I'm returning the department name. So obviously I need to select the department name. That's what I'm selecting. Okay. And there's only one table that I'm given. So obviously it's going to come from the employees table. So I'm off to a good start, right? And this is an employees table, but I'm really looking for the department name. And so what I really need to do is I need to group these employees by their department to get my answer somehow. So I know I need to group them by department name, okay? And then once I have groups by department, I'm really looking for groups that have more than 100 employees in them. And one of the things that the interviewer is really going to look for is if you are using the group by aggregate clause, you have to use the having keyword and not the where keyword. So that's one of the keys to this solution. So having a count of basically elements greater than 100. But I know that that asterisk, where it basically counts everything, is not as efficient as it could be. It's going to be more performant if I actually select a one specific field to count. So I'm going to count the ID here. So now I've got select the department name from the employees table, group everything by the department name, and return the department names that have more than 100 employee IDs in them. But there's a problem with this. Because I'm using ID down here, I have to include it in the group by clause. And so now I'm done, and that's my solution. And so that's how you might talk through a coding solution like that, and people can see what your thought process is. And so they could see that I understood the having keyword, that I understood how I could optimize this by using ID and not asterisk, and I understood the fact that group by has to include everything that you're processing on. So that's how I might do that. So again, not really Google type questions. You know, I haven't worked anywhere where we're where we're reinventing the bubble sort. You know, it's basically just simple stuff. Most companies need to get information out of a database. They need to sort it. They need to do some simple stuff with it. So I don't need you to be, a total star coder, but I do need to know that you can write some code and that you're organized in the way you think about it. But on top of just writing low-level code, I also want to know, can you make a solution with code? Can you actually accomplish something? Can you organize the whole process and do something with code? And so I like to see that you've actually done something with code, and this could either be in the internship, like Prosper IT, or it could be doing something on your own, a personal project. But it's nice to know that you've written some new functionality. For example, when I was at Prosper IT, we were working on a real live website, and I added a couple pages. So I took the existing models that were already there, but I was able to adapt them to make new pages that did things. And then even more, I remember we added SignalR for two-way communication between our server and the client. And that was something totally new that I added to the code base. And so it means that I wasn't just copying code, but I could actually figure out how to do something novel with code. Personal greenfield projects are useful. So, if you've written, I think I remember one of my early greenfield projects was writing something like Quicken, and basically a financial notebook. And so that means that you've been able to structure a whole solution from scratch and organize it, that you've been able to implement various pieces and make them work together. So I'm impressed if you've been able to add new functionality to existing real-world projects, or if you've been able to craft a whole project from scratch. Rote tasks like just basically copying pages or making changing the way a string is handled are a little bit less interesting. They don't really indicate that you can be creative with the code, that you can do something with it, in addition to just basically writing the logic, if that makes sense. So anyway, so it's useful for me to know, what did you do in your internship? What have you done in personal projects? And do they sound kind of sophisticated? Because it indicates that you can actually do something with it. It's And this is a hard one, because obviously as a junior developer, you may not have any corporate or production experience, and that's the way of it, right? You have to start somewhere. But if you do, it's useful for different reasons. Now, you may actually have some production experience as a junior developer, because you may have written a web page or an application that you have then published up on GoDaddy, for example. So it's real production code. It's really out there. It really works. You didn't write it for a company. You wrote it yourself at home. But what it tells me is that, A, you can write code that actually works, and you have some familiarity with DevOps, because you were able to get that code deployed up on GoDaddy so that other people could actually see it. And that is not something that everybody, that's something that most people don't learn as part of their training, whether it's at a boot camp or in an academic environment. You learn how to write the code. You may actually even write some demonstrator solutions, but actually deploying it and maintaining it and monitoring it are things that you learn later on when you're actually doing it for real. So if you've actually done something for real, even though it's only out of your own house, I think that's useful, because I know that you can at least deploy stuff. Now, if you've worked in a corporate environment, that also tells me that you probably can do teamwork to some degree anyway, and that you can work at scale. So there is a certain benefit to work in a corporate environment, and that is that the projects that you're working on are big, and the volumes are big, and you can do things like exhaust your WebSockets, or have timeouts because your systems get overwhelmed with the volumes. So this indicates to me that you're probably somewhat aware of the problems of scaling solutions if you've been in a corporate environment. And finally, it tells me that you're probably familiar with different elements of DevOps. If you're in a large company, you probably don't do the deployment, but you are probably familiar with version control and how to put things into Git, branching strategies and naming, and the use of different environments, like a development and a testing environment and a staging environment that you wouldn't necessarily do for a personal project. So if you've had experience in the corporate world, or at least written something at home that's gone to production and actually gotten deployed out into the real world, those are useful to know about. So next, let's go on to the non-technical things. Can you communicate? This is really important, because so much of development is talking with your teammates. It starts in the morning with your daily stand-up, where you say, this is what I worked on yesterday, and this is what I'm going to be working on today, and these are the problems that I might need some help with. And if you can say that, boom, 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 and you can be concise and you can be precise, then that's really helpful. It happens all the time that somebody says something that's not really precise, and we all go down the wrong rabbit hole because they use the wrong words, and we're like, oh wait, that's not what you meant. That's not actually what the problem is. The problem is something else, because we weren't being really precise. So if you can be a good communicator, concise and precise, that's great. And if you say, I don't know, if you say it all the time during the entire interview, then that may be a problem. But I actually kind of like to see somebody who, if I ask them some oddball question, and they're like, I don't know. Like, if I say, what data structure is used for a clustered index in SQL Server? I'm like, I don't know. The answer is B tree, but somebody who hasn't done data structures at the university recently probably wouldn't remember that. So I would rather you say, I don't know, than to kind of hem and haw and waste our time and, you know, try to craft some answer. And that's kind of part of being concise. You'll probably run into the concision problem from the very first question, you know, at least at Concora, that you get in the interview, which is, I think, probably the hardest question of the entire interview. Tell me about yourself. Like, what what do I say? There's so much to say. And you know, we're looking for, you know, are you enthusiastic about, um, have you demonstrated enthusiasm for being a software engineer? Do you have some experience doing it? And can you express these things in a concise manner without taking 15 minutes? You know, so for example, you know, I'm still working on the answer to this question, but you know, today I might say that, you know, I've done a lot of different things, and so I bring a lot of varied perspective to software engineering. But really, throughout the entire thread, I've been involved in writing code. We got a home computer when I was in junior high. You know, when home computers were just coming out, and I played with that a lot. My first job after college was doing numerical modeling of scientific observations in Fortran, which was, you know, a whole different world. And then in my next career, I wrote a database and some statistical reporting software that helped us manage our operations and also our risk management reporting. So when I moved back to Oregon, I decided to do software engineering full time again, and I've really enjoyed it. There are a lot of parts about it that really fit well with my personality. It's intellectually challenging, and it demands a lot of attention to detail, both of which I really like. And you know, it's also, especially development work, uh, it's quite varied. I mean, from day to day, you're doing different things, and you know, I really like variety in what I do. You know, sometimes I think I'd be better off if I were single-minded and just like to do one thing, but I like the variety of development, and particularly full stack development. Um, and finally, there's a lot of creativity in writing code. So I have really enjoyed it as a career. And that's what I would say. And so, you know, that's not the 30-second elevator spiel. It's probably the 90-second elevator spiel. But hopefully that's, you know, reasonably concise and has conveyed some kind of specific things about, you know, why I'm looking for a job in software engineering. And it struck me as I made this slide that really, you know, being concise, being precise, and being able to say, I don't know, all basically are just reflections of being a confident communicator. So, so yeah, just go in there and you know, try and speak confidently. You know, say it precisely, say it briefly, and if you don't know, say I don't know. Next thing I'm looking for is, are you personable? Obviously, are you enthusiastic about coding? Because, you know, I'm going to be your colleague. I'm not going to be your manager. But when I give my recommendations, or at least my feedback from the interview, a lot of what I'm looking for is this somebody I would enjoy working with? So, you know, are you going to get involved in a discussion about, you know, should we do this query and link, or do we need to write a stored procedure? What's going to be more performant? That's kind of fun. Are you responsible? Are you going to write, you know, are you going to basically stay on the task until the code works, make sure that it's well tested, and put out a good product? Are you flexible? You know, are you going to have a problem if the team wants to do it a different way than you do? One of the things about engineers in general, and maybe software engineers specifically, is we can be very opinionated. And so, you know, I want to see that you have good opinions that are well informed, but also that you're not, you know, completely married to them, and that you can make compromises and you know, work on the team that way. Are you conversant? You know, this is not as important. You know, I don't need to have long conversations with you, but it's helpful if you can, you know, if you can get your thoughts out there. So, If you really have trouble conversing, then that can be an impediment to to working together collaboratively. What I'm not looking for, though, is, are you a tech bro? Are you this person in the lower right-hand corner who was having a great time with a sticky note on his forehead? And the person behind them, they're pretty hip. They got the Converse high tops, but they're not looking at their screen. They're kind of looking somewhere else, and everyone looks like they're having a good time, but no one's actually coding there. And to tell you the truth, I'd rather have the person in the upper left-hand corner as a colleague, because they're going to be reliable, and they look like somebody that I could have some interesting technical conversations with. So it's good to work with fun people, but I am really not looking for somebody who's fun. When I say, are you personable? That might be a plus, but that is actually not that important to me. And then going on to software engineering knowledge. This is getting back into technical things, but I put it down here because I think as a junior developer, again, not as important as the other things. If you are smart, if you like software engineering, you will learn the knowledge. But it would be nice to know, after coming through a training program, that you at least know your basic principles, and that you have kind of an academic approach to software engineering, that you can talk about the solid principles, that you understand three-tier architecture, so that you know what things you should put in the presentation layer and what things should be moved out to the application layer. That you shouldn't put business logic in your data layer. Those sort of basic principles. And I may ask you deeper probing questions just for fun. We had somebody who came out of an academic university program reasonably recently, and they were kind of nervous, but I thought, well, let me throw out a question that that may be really applicable to their training. And so I said, what data structure do indices in SQL Server use? And in fact, he came out with the right answer, B trees. And so that kind of, I think, boosted their confidence, and also indicated that yes, in fact, they do. They were paying attention in school. So that's good. I might ask you about garbage collection. How does garbage collection work? It's kind of an obscure detail, but sometimes it actually is useful. But these deep probing questions are really just for extra credit. I mean, does it affect your value as a junior developer if you know about how garbage collection works in Windows? No, it really doesn't. That's a level of sophistication that is not really going to be important to the kind of tasks that you're going to get as a junior dev. So it's kind of like when you're taking those multiple choice questions and they say, we have a certain number of test questions that we're just seeing how people do. And so some of the questions may not actually be questions you're graded on. And so some of these, very specific gotcha questions, don't worry about them. If you don't know about garbage collection, just say, I don't know. I just kind of threw it out there just to kind of see, but it's not fundamental in the same way that I really do want to know if you know about solid principles and three-tier architecture. Things that I don't look for, other people might. Domain knowledge. So for me, in my last few positions, it's been in the financial industry, and it would seem like it would be really useful if you knew how credit cards worked if you're going to be writing software for a credit card company. But it turns out not to be that big a criterion. I mean, it's nice if you have domain knowledge, but my experience has been that software developers are really basically hired to write software. And domain knowledge is a nice to have, but not a primary criterion. I think that's particularly true for a junior developer who's going to be implementing the details, as opposed to a more senior developer who's going to be designing the systems. I think domain knowledge becomes more important as a senior because you have to actually design systems that do what they should for the business. So you have to know a little bit more about the business. As a junior dev, I think you just have to write things that do what they're supposed to do technically. So surprisingly enough, domain knowledge is not something that I've noticed that people are looking for, and not something I tend to look for. Specific tools and libraries, again, I don't particularly care if you worked with one particular database or another database, or one testing framework versus another testing framework. I mean, you can learn how to use a tool or a library in no time at all. So I don't really worry about that. Now, if you haven't done anything in C#, I might worry a little bit about that because learning a whole different language takes some time. And people do it. People do take jobs where it's a new language for them. But yeah, I would say that you probably need to have a pretty good background in the language that we use, and the major frameworks like Entity Framework take a long time to get proficient at, and so those are more important. But yeah, tools and libraries, I mean, you can learn whatever tool or library we're using. I don't worry about that too much. All right, so that's what I'm looking for out of a junior developer. And one of my colleagues pointed out that, well, there are a lot of people who are drawn to software engineering. There are a lot of people who are drawn to any kind of engineering who, are introverts, and they may not feel like communication and being personable and being conversant are their strong points. And that's why they write code, and that's legitimate. But if you say you're looking for that, then what are they to do, right? So what if you're this person who just likes to be in the box with their laptop, right? Like I say, that's legitimate. That's historically what a software engineer did. And there are some options. First one is practice. And this is not a panacea. It's useful if your problem is that you get nervous during interviews. That you know the answers, but you just can't get them out effectively because you get tongue-tied. Well, mock interviews can be great. What's even better is just to go to a lot of real interviews. During that 5-month period of time in between my first and my second contract that I was talking about, I put out a lot of applications, and it took a little while for the pipeline to fill up, but eventually I was starting to do a lot of interviews. There were weeks when I would have 2 or 3 interviews a week. And it got to the point where it was just no big deal to go to an interview. I had heard a lot of the questions that I was going to get asked before, and I'd thought about it after the last interview. And so I knew if I ever came across that question again, exactly how I was going to answer it. It felt very comfortable to go to interviews after doing a lot of them. So if being nervous is the problem, then practice is great. But if it's just a question of it's just not in my nature, then you have other options. Choice of company. So if you are in a company which is larger or more technically oriented, then being communication skills may be less important because you're going to be more of a smaller cog in a bigger machine. And the more technical the company is, the more they're going to care about how good are you at implementing algorithms to handle 500,000 hits a second in a search engine, as opposed to how good are you at collaborating with your peers in the other department. So a larger and more technical company may fit your style better. Also, choice of specialty. Development, and particularly full stack development, tends to really emphasize collaboration, communication, because you're working with a lot of other people all the time. You're working with your testers, you're working with your stakeholders. And so those skills are relatively important. And that's what I've done. And so that's what I look for. But a data-oriented position, database administrator, networking, may emphasize these skills less. Also, more technical specialties like security and AI. Again, if you have these skills, then you're going to be more in demand, and it's not going to be as important if your soft skills don't come across as well. So those are some of my thoughts about, if these soft skills don't sound like areas of strength, something that you can do to improve your chances. All right. So what changes if I'm interviewing a senior developer? Well, obviously, I expect the senior developer to have a higher level of coding expertise. If for no other reason, then they're going to be the ones who are making suggestions to the junior devs as to how to solve a problem, right? I also am expecting the senior devs to be able to be doing more of the crafting of solutions. And so they should have some sense of how to optimize code in different ways and how to design applications, both at the code element level and at the larger architectural level, and to know a little bit about DevOps. And again, this depends a little bit on the company. Core credit is relatively small, and so we as developers have done a lot of the DevOps, which has been really one of the fun things about it. And so as a senior developer, you're going to be responsible for doing the deployments, doing the monitoring, doing the troubleshooting. So advanced coding experience. I may expect a senior developer to know something about threading and asynchronous code. How do you do dependency injection? How do you select the lifetime for your dependency injection configuration? I'll often ask a senior candidate to write a unit test. Here's a real simple method. Write me a unit test to test it. Because by the time you're a senior, that should be pretty second nature. And we like people to write unit tests. And so being able to write a unit test suggests that it is something that you actually do. If you can't write a unit test, then you may not really be somebody who writes unit tests. Write SQL queries, like the one that we looked at earlier, or something slightly more complicated. And then I don't do the code samples, but I've seen other interviewers do it, where they'll have a code sample that's not very optimized and probably would throw an exception, and then you need to kind of find the problems in it and fix it and optimize it. Code optimization. As a senior, I expect you to be aware of the cost of remote calls. You can't make 5 consecutive calls to the database to get information, because each one of those is 300 milliseconds, and that adds up. That's a second and a half, which is forever to an end user sitting on the browser. So understand that remote calls are important. Optimizing code. Sometimes code that's optimized for execution speed or memory is really hard to read. And it might be more important for this particular piece of code to write code that's easier for people, next year or 5 years from now to read and to maintain, to make it more modular. And if so, how do you implement modularity? How do you break up a big piece of code into smaller pieces that can be reused and maintained? You can't just pick a random line number and split it there. There's a certain logic to doing it. And these are sort of some of the things that I would expect a senior to know about. When they're writing a new application or putting new functionality into it, they should know, they should have some specific and sophisticated knowledge about how do you write an element. A lot of elements follow a design pattern, like the factory pattern or the repository pattern. So they should know about that. They should know the rules of API design. because they may guide the junior developer in how to implement a new API. And at a higher level, how do you make a whole new project if you're making a greenfield project, which is to say one that's built from scratch? What's event-driven architecture versus service-oriented architecture, and when is one more appropriate than the other? When is a SQL database better than a NoSQL database, and vice versa? How do you optimize applications for the cloud? For example, cloud will typically bill based on a combination of memory and CPU cycles. And so you want to minimize that if at all possible. You also want to, being in the cloud makes it a little bit easier to make remote calls, because you may just be making remote calls within the same data center. They're not necessarily across the country, which helps. But considerations like that, and that's, again, more useful for a senior to know about. And finally, the senior may be responsible for DevOps, unless it's a really big company. I know at Concora, we want you to be somewhat sophisticated about how do you implement logging? How do you monitor a production application that's running in the cloud? How do you implement branching strategies in Git and manage your version control? How do you do deployments? What happens if a deployment goes bad? How do you fix that? Those sort of things. And finally, I promise, I did actually approach my manager and say, what are you looking for? And what do I notice that hiring managers look for that might be different than what I look for, as a colleague? And I think that in rough order of importance, they want to make sure that you fit in the company, that you're going to fit with the team, that you're motivated, and that you can get up and running quickly. Sometimes that last one is really important if they're hiring you for a project that's running behind. So what does it mean to fit in the company? Well, I mean, either you do or you don't. And it's not something that you can change. Some companies have great technical opportunities, and you can be involved in bleeding edge technologies and doing some really sexy things, but they are not very good at work-life balance. There's a lot of late night pizzas, and you might totally dig that, or you might be like, look, I got responsibilities at home. I'll put in a solid 9 to 5, but when 5 o'clock rolls around, I really want to get out. So fitting the company is really important, and you either do or you don't. And honestly, this should be your main question when you go in the interview, is saying, hey, I need a job, but is this going to be a job I'm really going to be happy with, or am I going to hate life? So this is a really important question going both directions. The manager wants to see that you've researched the company and the job description beforehand, and they love it if you ask questions. I remember in my most recent interview, they said, so what in the job description stands out? And fortunately, I had actually highlighted a number of things in the job description and thought about how, that is exactly what I was looking for. And so I could say, well, here in the first paragraph, it says this, and that's great because I've done this, and I can, and I enjoy doing this, and I want to do more of it, and this is what I can offer. And the second paragraph, it says this. So that, I was actually surprised. My manager thought that this last point was really important, that you had shown that you had researched the company beforehand and had some questions prepared. Fit with the team. It's nice to see that you worked with the team. This was one of the problems that I had interviewing for my current position, in that a lot of my previous experience was really strong on crafting solutions. I had done some big greenfield projects all on my own, again and again. And so I could write code, I could write applications on my own, but I'd never really worked as a team. I'd always been kind of sent off to go write this, tell us when it's done. And so, I had to reach back to my previous career and talk about how that was very team oriented. And yes, even though I hadn't worked on an IT team, I had a lot of experience working with teams and collaborating. And so this is really important because once again, not all engineers are, big team players. A lot of them just, like to go in the corner and write code. But most places you'll be are really team oriented and rely on teamwork. Do you have experience with the work paradigm? This is, again, not something I look for, but I've seen other managers ask about it. Do you have experience with Scrum and Agile and stand-ups? And can you tell me about the Scrum methodology? I figure that that's something that you'll learn. That if you're involved in a couple Scrum sprints, you'll get it figured out pretty quick. But I think some people like to know that you have worked in a paradigm like they're using. And be motivated, be energetic, express your enthusiasm for software engineering. Dressing well, not that important, but again, it indicates that you put a little bit of effort into getting ready for the interview. Because everyone likes to work with energetic and motivated colleagues and employees. So that helps a lot. And then finally, they like to get some sense that you can get up and running pretty quick. And that's where they're more interested in, have you worked with the specific tools that we work with? Have you worked with SQL Server? Have you worked with NUnit for testing? Have you done logging? Have you worked with .NET Core? And they may be more interested in the domain knowledge. Do you know about the financial industry? Do you know what underwriting means? Because you're going to be working on an underwriting engine. And if you have, then that's feather in your cap. Although, like I say, not something that I personally weigh, but I think that hiring managers weigh that more. So those are my thoughts. And look at that, we get 10 minutes. That's perfect. So that was just kind of off the cuff. I've been doing a fair bit of interviewing recently. And so when Tech Academy asked me to, let me stop for a second. When Tech Academy asked me to talk about something, I thought, well, I know it's on my mind recently, and I can talk a lot about it with very little preparation. So it's a good topic to just ask questions about. So what do we got?
All right. Attendees are welcome to ask questions in the chat, and I will pass them on to Chris. So go ahead and do that. We do have one from Robert McCabe. And Robert, he asks, how do you get an interview? Even after networking, updating my resume and LinkedIn, I've had very few.
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer to that. One of the unfortunate things is that I think that we're in a kind of a lull right now. There have been a lot of layoffs in the IT industry. The economy in general is kind of in a lull, and so I think that everyone's a little bit pessimistic right now. But I have interviewed in a more normal time. My problem was that my contract at Intel expired in December. And December and January and February are not very good times of the year to get hired. No one's really hiring at that time of the year. And so for various reasons, I ended up spending 5 months looking for work. And so I can sympathize with that a little bit. All I can tell you is, well, actually, I can say some specific things. Sent out a lot of applications. And I didn't do anything really special. I did use a variety of job boards, and the ones that were less technical ended up not doing well for me, and ended up just bringing in a lot of chaff. So, staying with more technical job boards. LinkedIn, I think, has stuff. Working with recruiters, I love working with recruiters. They actually have done a really nice job for me. And in fact, let me tell you, yeah, all of my jobs I have gotten through recruiters, as it turns out. So I guess that's my approach, is that I talk with recruiters and I follow up on their leads. The other thing that I did after being dry for a long time is I started my own company. And like I said earlier, you can demonstrate a lot of skills by doing your own projects. And so I did my own projects, and I actually found one or two clients and wrote real world applications. And so after a while, I was able to start saying, um, I have a company, and I have written uh, e-commerce sites for real and deployed them out into the real world. So it is a way that you can basically generate your own work experience, either by just writing your own applications or by getting out there and doing contract work. Even if it's for next to no money, it's still real production work that is now part of your resume. Um, and then it just takes a while. You put out a lot of interviews, you talk to a lot of recruiters, and it just takes a while for the interviews to start coming in. But like I said earlier, once they started to come in, pretty soon, I was doing a lot of them, and that was actually really fun. I got to they became very non-anxiety provoking, and it was really fun to go into a company and see what they were doing and what kind of tools they had and what kind of people they were, and I got to see a whole bunch of different stuff. So it got to be fun, but it did take a while for that pipeline to fill up to the point where the applications were turning into interviews.
All right, good stuff. And yeah, Robert, I know you've been trying for a while. What I would recommend is, as Chris said, reach out to some recruiters, and that you find, do some research on the recruiters, but then find one that works for you, and use a recruiter. Use their job placement also. And I think it's a really good point with Chris talking about starting your own company. We have had a good amount of students actually start at companies just with web development. So they start making, just simple websites for small companies, and that helps out your portfolio, helps out the company. You can make a little bit of money, but it's definitely a good way to start. And another question from Patrick Stover. He asks, what was your role at Intel?
It was fun. I was hired as a developer 2, software engineer 2. So the very first thing that I did was my manager said, "Hey, while we're getting your project ready to start, we just deployed this thing to production, and it didn't cause any problem in development or testing or staging. But now that it's gone to production, it's giving us this intermittent error. Can you figure it out?" And I learned a lot in tracking that one down, and it turns out the problem was that production was the first place that this code had been in a multi-server environment, and it was losing state. So it would go out on server A to the client, and the client would fill out the form and return it, but it would return to server B. And server B didn't know anything about what server A had done. And so it said, I don't recognize that. And the solution was actually to put a cookie on the application response. And so it stored a cookie on the client, and the client would return the cookie with its form response, so that even if it had swapped servers, it knew what was going on. And that was a fun little intro to life in real world software engineering. After that, I was sent off on my own to write an application that would help the manufacturing audit teams when they went to third-party manufacturers around the world and did quality reviews. So if Intel has a contract manufacturing plant in China, for example, they need to go and periodically audit them and assess their quality controls and that sort of thing. And they may not have internet access in remote parts of China. And so it ended up being a really interesting application where it was a Windows application. It was not a web application. So it would go on your laptop, and you would take the laptop out where you had no internet connectivity. You would work there, and then there was another web-based API that when you got back home, you would then download your findings into that, and then you would go ahead and manage your findings and resolve the deficiencies in that application. So it was basically a web component, a Windows presentation component, and a web API that connected them. So it was really complicated. I can't think of a better opening opportunity out of training. It's awesome. And I worked with really smart people there.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. And you did start as a contract employee also, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for working as a contract employee. You get to be exposed to different companies, different approaches, different kinds of software in a pretty quick time period, right? Every 6 months, you're doing something different. Every 12 or 18 months, you're doing something different. And I think that you can grow professionally a lot faster early in your career if you do contract work. I think that somebody who gets hired full-time somewhere and just does one kind of thing year in and year out for the first 5 years is actually kind of at a disadvantage. Although obviously at a certain point, there are a lot of very comfortable things about being full-time and not being a contractor. So I like being full-time, but being a contractor early on had a lot of perks and a lot of growth.
All right, good stuff. Rena asks, what are important skills that cybersecurity companies are looking for when hiring a junior developer?
Good question. I don't know. How's that? um, I am not a cybersecurity expert, and I have not worked around cybersecurity a lot. So, yeah, I don't know what they're looking for there.
I would just say having a portfolio showing how you penetration test and the experience you have with our school and the project you've done with our school will really help you out, Rena. All right, we'll be wrapping it up in just a moment here. Chris, what are some recommended resources for practicing for your code interview?
Well, I recall that when I was at Tech Academy, we did mock interviews, and those were useful. I tend to not like mock things. They feel weird to me. I would actually rather just dive in and do a real interview. Mock interviews make me more nervous than real interviews for some reason. But how do you get a real interview? Again, that's always the tough part as you're starting out. It may be that there are opportunities where you can interview for relatively non-technical things that you are easily qualified for, maybe even overqualified for. You might interview for IT tech support, for example. You may want to be a developer, but you can at least interview for tech support, which may not be a bad bridge to getting a developer job, and may be an interview that you might get more easily. I don't know if I have a great answer to that, but those are some thoughts that come to mind.
And did you ever read Cracking the Code interview?
I haven't.
Okay. That's a really good resource just for preparation for a technical interview. All right. Any more questions? You're welcome to leave them in the chat. We'll give it just another few seconds here. And Chris, I like your term conversant.
Yeah, it's hard to really explain, what that means, but when you hear it, you kind of know.
Yeah.
Basically, can you talk? Are you is it are you relatively non-painful to try to get something out of?
Yeah. No, it's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Chris, looks like there's no more questions, and really want to thank you for coming out today. You always have great information for our attendees and our students, so we appreciate that.
It's my pleasure.
And
Good luck to everyone out there. It's not the easiest time, and so I feel you, but it'll happen, and
all
it's
right, good
worth it.
stuff. Yeah, and we will definitely have you back, Chris. We appreciate it, and have yourself a good weekend, okay?
You too.
All right.
All
See you,
right.
Chris.
See you guys
And
later.
everyone else, we will have a Tech Talk next week. So it'll be the same time, same channel. And details for that will be on meetup.com. And everyone else, have a great weekend also. Thanks for coming out.